Hello, I am Jamey from Stonemaier Games, and I'm joined today by two special guests to discuss one of my favorite topics, one of my favorite mechanisms in games, and that is polyomino games, or games with Tetris-shaped pieces. Typically, we might make some exceptions to that, but pretty close. Polyomino games. And I'd like the two of you to introduce yourself. Why don't we start with Aaron? Let people know who you are and why you were excited to join me for a discussion about this topic.
Hi, my name is Aaron. I was very excited about this because this is probably of like the 90 games I've acquired over the years, probably the genre I have the most in. There's something about trying to fit together weird Tetris style pieces that just is so satisfying to my brain. And it's also the easiest ones to I find to teach. So I can get them to the table more often. So the combination of those two made me really excited about this topic.
Nice. Thank you. What about you, Jeremy?
Aaron just said something that really resonated with me, and I'm going to talk about that in my number one game about the ease of teach. I'm a teacher, so I'm a math teacher specifically. So my dad was a math teacher, and so I think just as a little kid, playing with shapes was something that was a big part of my childhood and my relationship with my father. And yeah, there's something satisfying about the completion. I think it's why people enjoy doing puzzles. Also, I just played a ton of Tetris as a kid, so that was maybe it comes from that too.
Absolutely. Both of what you said there resonates with me as well. Definitely, I played a lot of Tetris as a kid, and I'm glad that this has become a major mechanism. And like I said, it's if you're teaching someone a polyomino game, generally they know you're going to be fitting these pieces together, and then you can branch off from the special rules for that game from there. Why don't we start with our honorable mentions today? Aaron, in the order today, we'll go Aaron, Jeremy, and then Jamey. So Aaron, why don't you tell us about your honorable mentions?
So my honorable mentions is Race to the Raft, Tapestry, Cartographers, The Isle of Cats, New York Zoo, and A Feast for Odin. New York Zoo is just, like I said up top, it's incredibly easy to teach, and with the zoo theme, a lot of people do kind of, latch onto that, which makes it quite fun. And it's a pretty short game, so you can kind of play a game of it during the week. On the weekend, it's just it gets to the table quite a bit for me. And the artwork is very satisfying as well. And being so close to New York Zoo holds a special place in my heart. And then the other one was A Feast for Odin. This would have been in my top 3, but it is such a giant game. And it is a beast to teach. So it just doesn't get to the table as often, but just the interlocking mechanisms of that game is immensely satisfying. But show somebody that 50 action board and their eyes just go white. So it didn't quite make the top 3 for me.
Nice. So A Feast for Odin and New York Zoo is your top 2 honorable mentions. We'll talk about Aaron's top 3 in a few minutes. Jeremy, what about your honorable mentions?
Well, I had the same too, and so I don't have much to add to that. But I put Tapestry. That was my favorite element of Tapestry is the polyomino placement, and if I get this landmark, then it can go here in this perfect spot here, or I've got this kind of issue, this unresolved issue, and how do I put that in? There's a game called Mindspace. By All Play, and it has these just really cool brain dice, and you're just assigning colors to each die assigns a color to a different polyomino shape, and then you have to put that in, and each color scores in a different way, and it's made by a Japanese designer, and I just love that. Love that game. And then Patchwork, which is an all-timer for me. I wanted to put another Uwe Rosenberg game in my top 3 instead.
Yeah, Uwe is on a lot of our lists in many different places. He seems like he's really, really embraced this mechanism. Yeah. Well, thank you, Jeremy. So Mindspace and Patchwork is your top honorable mentions there. My honorable mentions are Super Motherload, Foundations of Rome, Sea Dragons, Tapestry. We all mentioned Tapestry. In the Hall of the Mountain King, Blokus, and A Feast for Odin. Sea Dragons is probably the most recent one that I've played. I played that very recently. And Tapestry, I played that recently. And I do also have 2 top honorable mentions, but I selected them. I don't want to say them yet because they appear on both of you, or on one of your lists, each of your lists. And these are 2 games that I'll mention when you come to them, that they really honestly would be in my top 3. But since they were on your list, I thought I'd discuss some other games in my top 3. So I'll highlight them when you talk about them, but I don't want to spoil them quite yet because we'll talk about them almost right away. So yeah, why don't we get to our top 3 here? Aaron, why don't you tell us about your number 3 pick?
Well, my number 3 is Planet Unknown. And I debated for a while whether this was actually my number 2 or my number 3. But anytime I get to this game to the table, it is just super fun. One, you have the Lazy Susan, as you can see in the picture, which is just so immensely satisfying to play with. And just the tile choosing mechanism where you have to choose from your pie of the Lazy Susan, and the sometimes stress-inducing decision where it's like, do I take this meteorite tile, but it gives me a lot of things I need, but it's going to block out my score if I can't take care of it? Or do I go with the safer option? Is just, it's a lot of fun to be had. But my favorite thing about Planet Unknown is that the boards are double-sided, or like there's advanced boards and there's the basic board. And so I find that this is very easy to get to the table with players of varying skill levels. So like when I play with my mom, for example, she'll usually play on the basic stuff, or basic planet, basic company, and I'll play on the advanced companies with the advanced planets. And this way we feel more evenly matched. And more often than not, she wins. But it is just immensely satisfying trying to figure out how to fill up this planet with all these tiles, but not having too many meteorites to affect your scoring at the end of the game. It's just, it's a blast. I love it so much.
One thing I'll add to what you said there, because this is one of my true top 3 Polyomino games. I love Planet Unknown. And I really like that each of the Polyomino tiles has 2 different rewards on it. So whenever you're placing a tile, you're always, and I don't think there's an exception to this, I think you're always getting 2 benefits. You're either moving up these tracks. Actually, you are moving up the tracks and gaining the benefits on those tracks. And that just feels really good to me, that with every placement of this Polyomino tile, in addition to the spatial puzzle, you are improving your engine as well and getting more and more benefits.
Yeah, it's like you can either move up 2 tracks or 1 track twice, I believe is usually what it kind of comes down to.
Nice.
Yeah.
Jeremy, have you played this one?
I have not, but I'm like, okay, I need to add this one to the collection. Because I just know there's certain games and game mechanics that you don't even need like very much of the game, and you just know you're gonna like it. And it's one of those. Polyominoes are just one of those that, as long as it's handled decently by the designer, I know I'll enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, great pick here, Aaron. Jeremy, I hope you get the chance to try it. That's Planet Unknown as Aaron's number 3. Jeremy, what about your number 3?
So Cottage Garden. I probably end up playing Patchwork. Well, I definitely end up playing Patchwork more because it's easier to hit the table. And when I ask people to play Cottage Garden, for some reason, I don't get a lot of takers on it. But I love the game. And I think the thing that fascinates me the most about it is this 4x4 grid and the way you choose. So 16 tiles initially populate this 4x4 grid. And then there's I think a gardener is what it's called, that kind of goes around on the 4 edges of thing. And you have to then choose one of the tiles that's in that column or that row, depending on where it is. And there's something about that I just find really compelling. The selection and the way, like, oh, if I choose this tile when the gardener is on this column, then when the gardener comes around to this row, my opponent won't have that piece, and I can see that they really need it, or whatever. And I love that element. The cute little wheelbarrow thing, and then there's fitting the polyominoes on this little 5x5 grid, and avoiding the pots or the cloches there, I think is what they're called, maybe, or something like that. I don't know. There's something just really satisfying. That's one of the elements of that I think makes polyomino games so appealing, is the mechanics attached to the playing of the pieces, whether that's the way that you acquire the pieces, the way you place the pieces, the rewards you get when completing a specified area without any negative space, or the game imposed barriers like the pots here that fill in the negative space that you have to work around. I think, to me, that is what makes polyomino games unique and appealing, are those the way that the pieces, because everybody likes playing the pieces, but it's what's attached to that in the game design, what mechanics are attached to that to me make it really fun.
Yeah, I'm glad you highlighted that, because that is one of the amazing things about these polyomino designs, that finding that right balance between giving players the creativity to place the tiles as they wish, added to the element of what's on the mat that you want to either cover up to gain instant bonuses versus what do you want to keep revealed. And meanwhile, trying to close off all that negative space, because usually that's worth either negative points, or you get more points for the more space that you cover.
And look at that image that you have there. That just looks so cool. I mean, it's just really nice.
Aaron, have you played this one?
I have not, but this looks really great. Like, I quite like the theme, so I need to check it out.
Yeah, I think in what Uwe calls like his trilogy of lighter weight polyomino games. I think it was Patchwork, this, and Indian Summer, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah. Great pick, and you're right. This is a really beautiful look. It's very satisfying to close these off. Awesome. Jeremy, thank you for sharing that for your number 3 pick, Cottage Garden. My number 3 pick is from another very acclaimed designer, Rainer Knizia. This is My City. Have either of you played My City?
I have not, but I really want to.
So My City is also on the list. Okay. This is a legacy game. But in its own right, even like when you're finished the legacy game, or if you just want to play like out of the box, you can just play the game without making it a legacy game if you don't want to. But it is a simultaneous action polyomino placement game where you're always placing the same tile as your opponents. So it's a little bit like bingo in that way. Everyone's using the same tile shapes here. But very rapidly, hardly anyone ends up with the same mat, even after a few turns. You're placing tiles in different places. Depending on the game in the legacy campaign, there are different rules as to sometimes where you can place tiles, and oftentimes how you're scoring the tiles. But in general, you're placing the tiles to try to fill up as much space as possible. You can't cross these building tiles over this river that divides your little city. And generally, you're also trying to connect tiles of the same color for various reasons, but in general, that's a good idea. But I love the main thing I want to highlight here is the simultaneous play, as we talked about with Aaron in Planet Unknown, because I think the puzzle of figuring out the exact right place to put tiles in polyomino games, like that is oftentimes the game. Where do you want to place these tiles? And that can take longer or shorter depending on the point in the game, the player. And so I really like these games that make it largely simultaneous, so that you have the kind of the freedom and the space to place these tiles without feeling like you're rushing anyone else, or that everyone else is waiting for you to take your turn. So I think My City and that simultaneous nature does it really well, especially since you're placing the exact same tile as the other player and seeing how your villages differ, even though you're placing the same thing. Yeah. So that is My City, my number 3. I hope you two get the chance to play it if you do. I believe it's on Board Game Arena if you ever just want to experiment.
Yeah, I think I saw it there. I just need to check it out. I like playing it physically first, but yeah. It's every time I walk by it in Barnes & Noble, I'm like, is this the day I get it? Is this the day I get it?
Awesome. Well, let's move on to our number 2s. Aaron, what is your number 2 favorite polyomino game?
So my number 2 is the heaviest on my list by far, and that is Ark Nova. And it really goes back and forth, like I said, in Planet Unknown, whether this is my number 2, my number 3, because it just doesn't get to the table as often, and that I kind of put that in my criteria of like, oh, that's important to me. But just the trying to puzzle out how are you going to build up your zoo with all these pieces. How many pavilions are you going to try and build? How many kiosks are you going to try and build? Do you want to like you have maybe an animal that needs to go in a 3 enclosure, but you have your build action at 4. Do you want to like build a 3, or do you want to go out and build a 4? Like, you know, like all these different kind of things are just, it's so crunchy and satisfying. But the reason that I had to put it at number 2 is because I've been teaching my mom board games. She originally was just a Scrabble player, and I helped build her skills up to the point that she can handle this game. And
Wow.
as of this recording, she is undefeated. So like it holds a special place in my heart as like just a affirmation of my teaching skills, but also just knowing that she loves it so much and she finally has a game that she can beat me more consistently. It just makes me really happy. So that's why it's at my number 2 is because of that. So yeah, it's amazing. I love this game.
I can see why you have such a special connection to it through the personal reason. I also love Ark Nova. This is the one that I thought was maybe a very slight stretch as a Polyomino game.
I thought so too, but I was just like,
it's close enough. Yeah, I agree. And it
Can I
does.
jump in here?
Oh, go ahead, Jeremy. Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, technically, you know, it's not made up of pieces composed of squares, but I think it does kind of work. And I wanted to put in Castles of Mad King Ludwig for the same reason, because it's both games kind of scratch an itch in my brain about the play, you know, how do I fit this thing in here, which I think is like at the heart of what you know, we love about Polyomino games is, hey, I've got this shape. Does this shape fit in this negative space? And so, you know, while technically maybe it's not, I think it does kind of, both games, you know, kind of scratch that edge.
Yeah, I think maybe the differentiating factor is it isn't just they aren't single cells that you're placing. They're not single squares. They're not single hexes. These are a series of connected hexes or squares.
And some of the shapes are like really strange. Like some of them can be like a T shape for, I think, the aviary. And then if you get the marine life expansion, there's some even stranger shapes. So for the aquariums, so it's just like that's kind of where I was like, okay, even though it's not the focus of the game, it's still a large part of it because it is your zoo at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And I want to piggyback off something Jeremy said earlier too about how we were talking about the decisions you can make as a designer for these games as to whether or not you are covering some things and then keeping other things revealed. I think Ark Nova takes that to new heights by wanting certain tiles to touch certain things or to be a certain distance away from other things. Like you can't have kiosks that are too close to each other. I believe it's kiosk. It could be the other one. Sometimes you have animals that want to be in an enclosure that's next to water or next to rocks. So I like that it adds thematic elements to the placement of where you put the tiles, not just trying to cover up benefits and that you're not allowed to cover up the rocks and the water.
And sometimes you just don't want to cover up the benefit because it's like, oh, well, I don't need what's on offer here. This isn't good for me right now. Let me see if I can hold off and play that game of like pushing your luck. Like, oh, maybe you should have just taken that because you kind of needed that enclosure. Who cares if you couldn't make the best use of that benefit? But it's just very fun and satisfying.
Yeah. Jeremy, any other thoughts about Ark Nova?
Yeah. It's such a good game. I've only played it once, but I would love to play it more.
Cool. All right. Well, Aaron, thank you for your number 2. Jeremy, what about your number 2?
I mean, this very easily could be the number 1, but Isle of Cats is just such a good game. Every time, you know, anytime somebody suggests that, I immediately am just like always up for playing it. The theme actually doesn't really work for me, but everything else is just is so fun. Again, the way that you put the pieces and, you know, what's attached to all that mentally is just so fun. Like all the drafting elements, you know, do I put this green cat next to this green cat in order to make a family? But, you know, really this purple one fits better in this spot right here. And I don't have the little negative space in the corner, or I don't have the rat uncovered. And then the treasures and the fact that all the cats have to touch a previous cat. So even though this piece fits really well over here in the corner, you can't do that. That's not a legal placement. Oh, I've got to cover up the room. The thing that really gets me about this game is that there's just so many things in the decision space that you're considering when you go to place each piece. How much currency do I have in fish to be able to afford this? If I get the one I really want, then I can't afford to get another, to place 2 cats this round, or 3 or whatever. There's just so many things in the game that are just fun and pleasant to think about. And then filleting it all on the ship, and then the lesson, and God, there's a lot of depth to the game, and yet it can be a pretty easy teach, which is, to me, the perfect game.
I love the Isle of Cats too. This is the other hidden honorable mention for me that could easily be number 1, number 2. I think the cats are adorable, and there's so many different layers to the tile placement here. You mentioned, like, are you covering up treasure chests with the color of that or treasure maps of that with that color of the cat to get the treasure tokens? Are you covering up the rats because they're negative points if you don't cover up the rats? Are you completing different rooms because each ship is divided into different rooms that you're trying to fill in with cats? Are you doing the families? You mentioned the families. Are you trying to connect same color cats? And then there's the final level, which is too big to really talk about, which are on the cards. The cards can give you so many different goals, like having rows or columns or filled edges, or so many different things to think about. And I like how the game gives you, like, that's where the complexity comes from, or the biggest complexity, those cards. But the game lets you ignore them if you want to. In your first game, you can just not draft those cards or not pay for them and just focus on these other elements of the puzzle. It makes it a very accessible game, in my opinion.
Yeah, in math teaching, we call that low floor, high ceiling. Is the floor low enough that somebody who really struggles or is new to this could, access it? But is the ceiling high enough that if somebody really is into this, that they can kind of take the top off and really just go, 100 miles an hour?
Yeah, I like that. Aaron, have you played this one?
Oh yeah, I have the big box with the expansions. I very seldomly now play without the kittens module. But it was a real aha moment around the table when one of us, I forget if it was me or my younger brother, we started collecting those blue cards that give you like the objectives and stuff. And then we saw like how much of a point difference there was at the end of the game. We were like, oh, we've been ignoring this. We really should focus on this a little bit more because it really helps make up for any negative points you could potentially get for not filling out your boat as well. It was just like, it was a really fun, like, oh, okay, let's go again. Let's do this.
Nice. And one of the things I find in playing the game is that when people play, they just feel good afterwards. And gosh, what a treat, what a accomplishment for Frank West.
I agree. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Frank West, the designer of this game. Yeah. The Isle of Cats, one of my favorites, number 2 for Jeremy. My number 2 is Patchwork. So one of you did mention Patchwork in your honorable mentions. This is, I would say, a modern classic Polyomino game at this point. 2 players, you're drafting tiles from a giant circle of tiles where you can always choose from the next 3 available follow this little token that moves around the track. Time is a resource in this game, so I really like that you're trying not to jump too far ahead of the other player because you have to spend time to sew these pieces onto your quilt. But you also have to pay buttons, and you get button income based on the buttons that are exposed on your little mat. Aaron, you mentioned earlier that you have some connections by playing games with your mom. I play this game with my little nephew, Aaron. He's 5 years old, and I just played with him at a family reunion recently. I had taught him at Christmas, and then we played with all the right rules. He didn't know quite all the rules at Christmas, but he knows them all now, and he absolutely crushed me. And I was playing to win. I was not playing nice. I was playing to win because I like Patchwork. I like filling in the 7x7 square. I like getting the button income. But he really focused on button income and really crushed me at the end. So it's really satisfying for me to see him excel at that at this game, especially when I'm genuinely trying to win against him. So,
I know that feeling.
Yeah, Patchwork. I've only played. I think I've only played the standard version of Patchwork. I've heard there's a Halloween one. I think maybe a Christmas one. There are other related ones that have like very slight tweaks to the rules, but I haven't played any of them. Have either of you played any of the other themed versions?
I think I've seen. Maybe I'm making this up, but I thought there was like a Valentine's Day version of it or something.
That makes sense.
But like, I'm like, it's not as readily available near me. So like,
Okay.
I always kind of forget. Like, oh yeah, I should be getting that game at some point. And like, I always see like the offshoot, and it's like I kind of want the base like regular version if I'm gonna get it. But it is on my list of ones that I want to play because it looks it looks really great.
I'm waiting for the Flag Day version of the game. You know, they got Halloween and Valentine's and Christmas, so I'm waiting for the Flag Day. But this game has a special place in my heart because it's something that I played with my 2 daughters a lot when they were younger, and it's really accessible to to younger kids. And I think that's something endemic to all Polyomino games is that even a young child can fit pieces together and understands just how that's supposed to work. But this game it's such an accomplishment because of, like you said, all the buttons, the pieces, the shapes. The time track is so important. And then, I can see this piece that I written, my favorite piece, which is that blue one right there, the 5-3 one. That's the one I want, and it's 5 away. And so if I get this one, then that means, my daughter's probably going to get the one I want. But if I do this one, then no matter what they do, and then you can pass, and passing is a really kind of, to me, strategic element of the game. Man, it's such a beautiful game.
I really need to get this game.
It's incredible. And it's quick too.
It is quick, yeah.
Thing. It can play in like 30 minutes, and that's that's
very nice.
That offer the strategic depth in that short amount of time.
Well, Patchwork, recommend to anyone who is curious about Polyomino games. Especially, I would say this is a great one as maybe your first Polyomino game of all the games that we mentioned so far. There's one other one that might fit into that category. Let's go to those top picks right now. Aaron, what is your number 1 favorite Polyomino game right now?
All right, my number 1, and this was when you asked me to make this list, I was like, well, this is an easy decision. It's Foundations of Rome. I just love everything about this game. I love the simplicity of this game. You have 3 actions. You have a choice of 3 actions on your turn. Either buy a plot of land, place a building, or gather income. So it's incredibly easy to teach. And when anyone sees those 3D like buildings and like picks them up, they're just like in awe. And it's not just like a table presence game. There's actually some depth to it that like once the first round ends, when I'm teaching it to people, and like usually at the end when I'm teaching, I will then place a civic building, which is what gets points for adjacencies. And I'll usually do that right at the end of the first round when I'm teaching a game to just be like, oh, here's this other level to think about. And then when people are like, oh, and it like really clicks, like, oh, okay, now I have to be aware of like what I'm placing around on the board. Because you can put population down to get population. You can put commerce buildings down to get money when you take income. And then on top of that, with the population, if you get too much, you're just going to help the person behind you because they get points for your population if they're behind you. So it's just like there's a lot of nice little elements to this that's just like, oh, it's lovely. The only knock against it, and it's a sizable knock, is it is prohibitively expensive. But fortunately, I saw at Gen Con this past weekend as of this recording, Arcane Wonders has a more budget-conscious version coming out called Foundations of Metropolis. It's the same game, but at a much more affordable price. And I can't recommend this game enough. It is so good. It is so satisfying. Just seeing the board when it's all done and seeing Rome basically built up is just so immensely satisfying. And I love that like you just flip the board over and allows you to play for 5 players. So you still get that satisfaction on the one side for 3 players and the other side for 5. Seeing that board filled is just so good. And everyone I've introduced it to has loved it and adored it. And it's such an easy teach, which is always like a criteria of mine. I want to be able to introduce it to as many people as I can. And despite the 20-pound box, it gets to the table very often.
So, Aaron, there's one key thing that I'm not sure if people can fully grasp from what you just
Oh,
described,
yeah.
in that this is the first game we've talked about where everyone is actually sharing the same space of where they're placing the polyomino tiles. You talked
Yeah.
about it a second ago that you're building Rome together. You're not building 5 separate rooms. You're building one room together.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get your thoughts, you and Jeremy. Why do you think it is? This is your top pick, so that says something. But it is interesting to me that most of these games that we've picked are about building your own private polyomino puzzle, solving that puzzle privately versus a shared puzzle. Even though on our honorable mention list there were ones that had that shared puzzle. Jeremy, why don't you go first on that, and then Aaron, we'll go back to you. Why do you think there's a reason for that, or just personal preference at this time?
That's fascinating, but I do think I bet if you polled playtesters when kind of building a game like this, that people would say, I don't like what that person was doing. I was planning on doing this, and I think that's one of the fun elements in all these games is like the thinking ahead. With Patchwork, Cottage Garden, like all these games, it's like, all right, 3 moves down the road, I need to have this, and so I need to. If I put this one here next, then the next time I can do this. And I think there is something about that if you're putting in a shared space and somebody else does something, that you have to adapt to it. And maybe some people don't like adapting. They like because this is scratching a part of our brains that likes the completion aspect. And maybe there is some kind of ownership of that. Personally, I like that. I think that's kind of cool. It kind of reminds me of Tetris when the pieces are falling. You don't have agency over what pieces come or like a lot of these games, there's barriers built in, on the board that you have to work around. And so to me, if somebody else puts something in a place I don't want, I will just adapt to that. But I think maybe there's other players that don't like, don't like that.
What about you, Aaron? You picked this at your number 1, but why do you think that
I think
isolation
based on your question, I think like this is kind of an anomaly because usually I like the more meditative multiplayer solitaire kind of polyomino games because you can get into, like I said, a meditative state, which is just it's what I like after like a stressful day. Is just be like, okay, we're all going to be in charge of our own boards. We're all going to like work on this puzzle like individually but together. But I think just the lighthearted nature of Foundations of Rome ultimately, like it can be pretty tense in the middle when someone takes a plot that you were gunning for. But like it's very much like, I think with this game, at the end, you have this landmass that you like, this square that you've been building upon, and just seeing everyone's work around the table is so immensely satisfying that I don't mind that it's more confrontational. Because usually confrontation, I'll say shy away from, but I think that's maybe too strong. But like it's not my go-to. I tend to like pick less confrontational games because they tend to be easier to get people on board because they don't think like, oh, I'm gonna go up against a skilled player. They're gonna like just wreck me. If so, it's easier to get a non-confrontational on the board in that sense.
And just to do a quick recap for anyone who wants to know, if someone likes the shared space polyomino, the games that we've talked about today that do have that in some way are Race to the Raft, Foundations of Rome, Blokus, Sea Dragons, and In the Hall of the Mountain King. Actually, if you do like this shared space, I would highly recommend In the Hall of the Mountain King because it does it in a really, really interesting way in terms of how you're placing polyominoes in a shared space. Sea Dragons too. Yeah. Jeremy, any thoughts? Okay.
Just seeing the board, it made me realize that certain polyomino games like really dig into the poly aspect of the polyominoes. Like I'm noticing in the image there's a lot of mono ominoes and biominoes and triominoes. Whereas some of the games really get into like a lot of, hexamino or, like, where the more kind of like really big and like, Isle of Cats, that is one of the, like the crazy cats that are in all these like wild positions. And, those are just like, because I think in a lot of these games, a big part of it is completing an area, and the bigger, the more area that a polyomino covers, the more kind of advantageous it is. Although usually they're in weird shapes, and so that makes it, it's like a trade-off. But for sure, in like patchwork, that's a big part. Is like I need to fill up that 7x7 area first because it's a race to do that. And if I get this really big one, that'll help me do it, but it has less buttons. And so, to me, that's a big part of polyomino games is bigger area and more complexity versus a simpler piece, but that covers up less area.
Well, let's talk about another game that does that in an interesting way. Why don't you talk about your number one here, Jamey?
Yeah, this my number one is Project L, and it just had to be that this game is incredible. You have these, little kind of bakelite pieces that are just really satisfying, and then you have these little puzzles that you're trying to fill. And to me, the thing that hooks people on this game just so immediately is the engine building. That when when you're trying to fill in these puzzles, you get to choose which puzzle you try to finish, and then the puzzles have a point number reward, and also you get a bonus piece. And so you start the game with what I call an asparagus and a corn, and then as the game progresses and you finish more of these, you get more different pieces as bonuses, which allows you to finish more puzzles. Then you can do a master action, which lets you work on multiple puzzles at the same time. But this game is one of the easiest to teach. I've taught this to 4-year-olds, and it's very simple to understand. Hey, this piece needs to go in this spot right here, and then I only have this remaining bit that needs to be finished, and so I need a yellow or a green to do that. And the way the game ramps up so quickly with the engine building is just immensely satisfying. And everyone that I've played this game with is immediately like, where can I buy this? It's not just, oh, that was fun, but they immediately want to play it again and acquire it.
And part of my theory for that, and you've touched upon it here a little bit, is in a lot of these games that we've talked about, it is very rare to actually fill your entire space with pieces. I think in Cottage Garden you do it probably the most of any of the other games we've talked about, but it is very satisfying to do that. And this is a game that is entirely about filling these spaces. Like you're going to fill, I don't know how many, 8, 10 tiles over the course of the game. So you constantly get that sense of completion, which feels really good. I'm glad you highlighted this one. Aaron, have you played Project L?
I have not, but I literally held it in my hands at a Barnes & Noble to go buy. And then I realized I was going to Gen Con soon. I was like, I need to save my money. But I was like this close to getting it because I was like, oh, this looks amazing. I want to play this so badly.
It is really satisfying to play. And I just in case anyone makes this mistake, I made the mistake the first time I played that I thought when I completed one of these tiles, I had to get rid of all of the tokens I used to complete it. But that is the engine building of the game. So that is, you're missing most of the game if you misplay the way I did the first time.
That's funny. The first time that I played, we were doing the chaining. So where you get a piece and you can immediately then play it. And it felt like incredibly satisfying. It was almost like too easy. And it was just like, oh, high fives. This is like, we're awesome. And I like the constraint. It's just such a simple design, but like really effective.
Yeah. Great pick at number one here for you, Jamey. Project L at number one. My number one is one that one of you mentioned it earlier, and that is Cartographers. Another simultaneous polyomino game where players are really, again, they're given the same, you flip a card that shows usually 1 or 2 polyomino shapes, and then either 1 or 2 terrain types that will be that shape. And then you are going to draw that shape and that terrain type on your map. Mine never look as beautiful as this one does, this BGG image, but you can make it as artistic as you want to be. And you're trying to solve a series of goals that combo together. You can see a few of these goals up here. So like in the first round, I believe it's like A and maybe B or A and D. You're trying 2 combinations of goals you're going to score each round. But I like, again, in fact, this might be a commonality between mine. Like this and in my city, everyone has the same information to work with, but you're creating very different things as a result of that same information. And you're doing it simultaneously here. as you create this map of the kingdom to try to impress the ruler of the kingdom. Yeah, so I think the goals add a lot to the game. In fact, the polyomino shapes that you're placing, they really they do very little themselves. Maybe even, I would say, almost nothing by themselves other than surrounding mountains to earn a coin. Really, the heart of the game is looking at these goals and figuring out, based on the goals, where to place the shapes on your map. Have either of you played Cartographers?
Oh yeah, I haven't played it with other people yet. I've only played the solo mode. But it is very satisfying. I think the only thing I'm going to do when I start teaching it is, because each season focuses on 2 goals, I'm probably going to have those 2 goals offset to just reinforce, like, hey, here are the goals that are the focus for this round. Because there are times where it's like, I will focus on C when C is not even in question. And it's like, oh, whoops, I forgot to focus on A and B.
Yeah, that's helpful when you know the game better, so you can plan ahead. Be like, okay, I know eventually I'm going to work towards this goal, but early on, you're right. It's nice to be able to focus on just 2 things. And
I
Jeremy,
think
are
it's
you
really fascinating what you said, Jamey, about the shared pieces versus the competing for pieces, because that is an element of all the games. That's polyomino games I find to be a lot more interactive than other games, because it's like there is that kind of, I want this piece. I can see that you need this. There are certain mechanics that are easier than others to ascertain someone's strategy. And when you can see on their board, oh, they have this negative space and that piece fits perfectly in there. So there's that kind of competition for the pieces and the spots in those other elements. And so that's cool that you were highlighting games where that's not an element of it.
Yeah, I like that they both can work. You're right. There's pros and cons to both, depending on how much maybe player interaction that you want. But in general, Aaron, you touched upon this. I like to solve my own puzzle when I'm doing a polyomino game. Yeah. Although I still like being mischievous in Blokus sometimes and trying to block out other players. Depends on the interface. Depends on the length of the game, I think.
And that's also one of the interesting things about some of the game. For a lot of the games, you're choosing the piece, the polyomino that you actually want to place. But then in Project L and in Cottage Garden, you're choosing which one of these board spaces that you want, and some of them, like this has these pieces here and a lot of openness, whereas this one has more kind of in the middle, and then in Project L it's like, oh, do I want this small one or this bigger one? And so there's different ways that the player agency occurs. Is it with the polyomino, or is it what the polyomino is going into?
A Feast for Odin does that too with the islands. Do you
do
you even care about the islands, and which island do you choose to go after and try to fill in?
Yeah, it took me a while to graduate, if you will, to the islands in A Feast for Odin, because I was just so focused on learning the basics that I was like, how am I even gonna get to that point? Like, this is so hard as is. But it is satisfying when you do.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for talking about this. I love talking about polyomino games. I do have an older video about it that I'll include in the description, but it was great to revisit it because new games are coming out with this mechanism all the time, and it's fun to highlight them. So Aaron, Jeremy, thank you so much for your time. And if you have any questions for any of us, feel free to include them in the comments. I'll let Aaron and Jeremy know when the video is live so they can see any questions that are posted there.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Jamey.
Thank you, Jeremy.